Good morning, students. Hope you're all doing well. In the last class, we studied about how the inscriptions are deciphered and the various ways adopted by an epigraphist to read what is given in the inscriptions and make some conclusive sense out of it. The first step was deciphering the script. The second was compare similar inscriptions and arrive at a logical conclusion. The third was about assessing the factual accuracy of the inscription. Okay, and finally, we spoke about how historians try to make the meanings of these inscriptions much more clearer by adding words while reading the inscription. Okay, they do this by adding words in brackets. Now let us move on to the next topic. Let us now look into some of the questions that have remained unanswered in spite of inscriptions being deciphered. See, just because an inscription has been deciphered does not mean that it will reveal all the information that we are looking for. Now, most of these Ashokan inscriptions, if you look at it, are placed on important trade routes. So, what was the intention behind it? So that the passerbys would know what the king or the emperor wanted to convey. But just because an intention was there doesn't mean that it actually happened. एक normal example ले सकते हैं. Like even if you are traveling in today's time, if you see a signboard, you'll only look for directions. I mean directions leading you to your destination. Or as a weary traveler, you might be looking for a place where you could rest. इससे ज़्यादा और इससे beyond, we don't start reading all the stuff which is provided on the signboards which are along the roadways. So similarly, the passerbys using these trade routes or roads during that time, would they have stopped and actually read these inscriptions? It is highly unlikely. Then another thing that you need to keep in mind is that the general population of the subcontinent were not literate enough. Okay, and even if they were literate, it does not necessarily mean that they were well versed with Prakrit language. Prakrit was the official language of the Mauryan court. Court matlab Raja ka darbar. So the people living in the periphery of the empire, towards the outer boundaries of the empire, might not even know the messages which was inscribed or engraved in the Prakrit language. Hence, it might have defeated the purpose. We do know for a fact that for propagation of Dhamma, there were specialized officers who would read the tenets of Dhamma inscribed on inscriptions and tell it to people. But is it possible for all the other inscriptions that were commissioned by the king, that there were officers reading it out to other people at particular intervals of time and interpreting it for them? Highly unlikely again. Then another thing, whether a declaration was made by a king, was it unanimously accepted without any questioning by the general population of that territory, is also difficult to answer this question. Let us, as more and more inscriptions are deciphered, it leads to more and more questions being unanswered. For this, we look into a case study of an Ashokan inscription which specifically speaks about the anguish felt by Ashok after waging the war against Kaling, that is present day Orissa. So it is given in the source 11 of your book NCERT. Please read it carefully. So just to provide a gist of it, it is the Edict 13 of the Ashokan inscription which gives a detailed account of how remorseful Ashok was after witnessing the horrors caused by the Kaling War. He was affected so much by the devastation which he saw that he abandoned war as a means of physically conquering people, which is called Bheri Ghosh, and he adopted the principles of Dhamma to conquer people spiritually, which is also called Dhamma Ghosh. So he changed his tactics. So this inscriptions also gives an estimate of how much loss of lives happened and what all destruction was caused. But here is an interesting thing. This inscription, claiming to showcase the anguish of Emperor Ashok, was not found within the region of Kaling itself. It was found in the other parts of his empire. So what does this indicate? There might be a several possibility why did this happen. The first one being that this entire subject was so painful for the people of Kaling that Ashoka did not deem it to be fit to address it to the people then. Second thing, there might have been an inscription in Kaling regarding this, but since many inscriptions have not been discovered yet, we cannot claim to say that there was no inscriptions just because we have not discovered it yet. Okay, maybe it still needs to be discovered. Or finally, there is even a possibility that the people of Kalinga might not have agreed with this viewpoint and intentionally removed this inscription from Kalinga later on. Okay, we don't know for sure. So that is why, see, one inscription can lay out so many possibilities, with each possibility could have actually occurred, but epigraphists, we don't know that for sure. So that is why it remains open ended till now. So what this means is that, in conclusion, that in spite of reading inscription, in spite of having the means to read the inscription, it does not necessarily ensure that once you have read the inscriptions, all the questions will be answered. Limitations of inscriptional evidence. Now, in this topic, we'll see that inscriptions are not foolproof. Okay, they do not provide us with all the information that is needed. उसमें भी कुछ limitations है. Let us look into these limitations one by one. First point is technical limitations. Okay, now sometimes the alphabets or the letters engraved on these inscriptions can be engraved very faintly. Okay, so it increases the chance of making it more difficult for the epigraphist to read it. Then sometimes the letters might be missing or the inscriptions may have been damaged. Obviously, we are talking about not only inscriptions engraved on stones, but also those which might have been made on organic material. Okay? There is always a possibility of them being decayed over time. Then, lack of clarity. Now, it is not always possible to know about the exact meaning of the word which is used in the inscription. Why is that? That is because language always evolves. ठीक है, एक ही language होने पर भी एक word का वो जो context है, it might change in future. Its meaning might change in future altogether. Okay, over hundreds of years, over generation to other generation. There is another problem of undeciphered inscriptions. So there are thousands of inscriptions which have been discovered till now. but that does not mean that all these inscriptions have been deciphered, okay? And neither it means that they are translated and finally published in a proper historical medium, okay? So historians still have a lot of tasks in front of them, that is deciphering these discovered inscriptions. Then we also have to keep in mind that many of the inscriptions might have been destroyed over time, and what we have been able to excavate or unearth are only a fraction of what was initially commissioned. So it's like getting only a pieces of jigsaw puzzle. वो पूरा picture देखने के लिए you need to get all those inscriptions, but that is not possible. So the historians have to be satisfied with what they have, okay? And try to interpret or reread and reinterpret it over time. Then another problem is non-relevance of inscriptions. Now, one example of this is we have already studied about Prayag Prashasti, okay? And we spoke how it was composed by a court poet of Samudragupta called Harisena, and this entire Prashasti, okay, it was basically harping on the exemplary virtues of the king, okay? It was even equating the king with certain gods or deities. So it might help in establishing a political history, that is dynasty को establish करने में, उसके बारे में लिखने में help कर सकता है, but it cannot help us in understanding the economic and social life of common people. That is the routine agricultural practices, their daily existence. These things find no mention in these inscriptions. What is just portrayed is the perspective of the person who commissioned it. Now, these are the limitations given in your book. Please write them point-wise. Regarding the conclusion of this topic, it is basically talking about how historians have changed their way of perceiving history. Instead of only focusing on the political history, which was highly prevalent during the 19th and 20th century, issues such as economic history and political history started gaining prominence. And recently, historians are much more preoccupied with new themes in history, okay? They are talking more and more about the role played by gender in history, the role played by marginalized groups in history, okay? So these topics are under a category known as subaltern history, which is highly fascinating. If you want to study history later on in your life, you will understand why the present day scholars are so obsessed about it. So this subaltern history is not history from the point of view of the victors. हमेशा कहते हैं ना, history is written by the victors, but this is not the case in subaltern history. You are re-examining all the evidences. The historians are re-examining the evidences and looking for clues so that they can finally give voice to what happened to these people, these marginalized groups, or the women during our history. Okay, so this is it for today.